Shadows of Success. Rebecca Winters clutched her coffee mug, watching morning sunlight filter through the kitchen window of their modest suburban home. She smiled at the sound of her husband's hurried footsteps upstairs. Dominic was always rushing these days. 3 years into their marriage, and his pace had only quickened. "Have you seen my blue tie? The Harrington one?" Dominic called, his voice echoing down the stairwell. "Check the second drawer," Rebecca answered, having organized his growing collection of designer ties just yesterday. "The one with the silver pattern." Dominic appeared in the doorway moments later, tall and handsome in his tailored suit, the tie perfectly knotted at his throat. His dark hair was meticulously styled, and his smile, though briefer than it used to be, still made her heart flutter. "You're a lifesaver," he said, grabbing the travel mug she'd prepared. "The Henderson account could be our breakthrough. If I land this, we're looking at a serious promotion." Rebecca nodded, having heard variations of this promise many times over the past year. "You'll be amazing. Just remember dinner with the Fosters tonight at 7. Dominic's smile faltered. "About that, I might need to reschedule. Henderson wants to discuss details over drinks if things go well." "That's the third dinner this month, Dom," Rebecca said softly, trying to mask her disappointment. "They're our oldest friends. And they'll understand that this is how careers are built," he replied, checking his watch. "This is all for us, Becca, for our future." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. As Dominic answered the call and walked toward the door, Rebecca felt the familiar ache of something slipping away, something more valuable than any promotion. That evening, Rebecca sat alone with the Fosters, explaining Dominic's absence with practiced grace. After dinner, she declined their offer to stay longer and drove home through the quiet streets. The radio filling the silence her life was accumulating. She was surprised to find another car in their driveway, not Dominic's sleek company sedan, but a modest blue hatchback she recognized immediately. Julian Porter, her friend since college days, stood leaning against it, his tall frame relaxed, sandy brown hair slightly tousled. "Julian, what are you doing here?" she asked, genuinely pleased to see him. "I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting," he said with a warm smile that reached his gentle eyes. "Thought I'd drop off these books you mentioned wanting to read." Julian owned a small publishing company that had grown surprisingly successful over the years, though you'd never know it from his unassuming demeanor or practical choice in cars. He handed her a paper bag containing 3 novels. "You remembered," she said, touched by the gesture. "Of course. How are you, Becca? Really?" Something in his tone, the authentic concern without pressure, made her honesty surface. "I'm adjusting. Dominic's career is taking off, which means he's rarely home. It's what he's always wanted." Julian nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And what about what you've always wanted?" The question lingered between them, unanswered but necessary. Rebecca shrugged. "Dreams evolve, I guess." "Some do," Julian agreed quietly. "Others just get buried." He checked his watch. "I should go. Early meeting tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Rebecca called after him. "Julian, thank you for remembering the little things." He smiled, a gentle expression that conveyed more than words. "The little things are what life is actually made of, Becca, despite what the world tries to sell us." After he drove away, Rebecca entered her empty house, Julian's words echoing in her mind as she placed the books on the coffee table. When Dominic finally came home near midnight, smelling of expensive scotch and success, she pretended to be asleep. She wasn't ready to tell him about the job offer she'd received that morning, a chance to teach art at the local community center. Some dreams were safer kept quiet when cast in the shadows of success. Golden handcuffs. 6 months had transformed their lives in ways Rebecca could never have predicted. Dominic's promotion had catapulted them from their modest suburban home into an elegant 3-story residence in Oak Ridge Heights, complete with marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased manicured gardens. The Henderson account had been just the beginning. "What do you think?" Dominic asked, draping an arm around Rebecca's shoulders as they stood in their new living room, surrounded by furniture that had been selected by the interior designer he'd insisted on hiring. "It's beautiful," Rebecca answered truthfully, though she couldn't ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. "Just different." Dominic squeezed her shoulder. "Different is good. We've upgraded, Becca. This is what success looks like." She nodded, wondering when success had become defined solely by square footage and zip codes. The art supplies she'd once scattered across their old dining table were now neatly tucked away in a designated room upstairs, a studio Dominic had proudly shown to his colleagues at their housewarming party, though Rebecca had barely used it. "I need to head out," Dominic said, checking his Rolex, a gift from the firm's partners after he'd secured the Westbrook investment. "Dinner with the board tonight." "On a Saturday?" Rebecca tried to keep disappointment from her voice. "That's when they're all available," he replied with a shrug. "Don't wait up. These things tend to run late." After he left, Rebecca wandered through the immaculate house, feeling like a visitor in a museum rather than a woman in her home. The community center had called twice that week about increasing her teaching hours. Her art classes had become unexpectedly popular, but she hadn't mentioned it to Dominic. His subtle comments about hobby jobs still stung. The doorbell's chime echoed through the empty house, startling her. When she opened the door, Julian stood there with a potted plant in his hands. "Housewarming," he explained with a smile. "Though I'm guessing you've already received enough crystal vases and silver trays to open a department store." Rebecca laughed, the sound surprising her with its authenticity. "Come in, I'll give you the grand tour of whatever this place is." As they walked through the house, Julian listened attentively while she pointed out features and finishes she'd had no part in selecting. He noticed the small touches that were unmistakably hers. A hand-painted bowl on the entry table, photographs from their college days, books stacked by the window seat. "Your studio is impressive," Julian remarked when they reached the room upstairs. "Have you been working on anything new?" Rebecca glanced at the pristine easel, the organized supplies, the untouched canvas. "Not really. There's been so much going on with the move and?" Julian prompted gently. "And Dominic thinks my teaching at the community center is—" She hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound like betrayal. "Less important than it used to be, now that we don't need the extra income." Julian frowned slightly. "Your art was never about income, Becca. It was about something essential to who you are." The simplicity of his understanding made her throat tighten. "Things change," she managed. "People change," Julian corrected, his gaze steady, sometimes by choice, sometimes by slow surrender. They migrated to the kitchen, where Rebecca made tea and they sat at the massive island that could comfortably seat 8. "How's the publishing company?" she asked, eager to shift focus. "Growing, actually. We've expanded into educational materials and literary fiction." His eyes brightened as he spoke. "We just signed Nora Fletcher for her debut novel. She's brilliant." "That's wonderful." "You always said you wanted to support new voices." Julian nodded. "Dreams don't have to die, Becca. They just need nurturing." Rebecca stared into her tea. "Some dreams require permission these days." "From Dominic?" Julian asked quietly. "From reality," she corrected, though the distinction felt blurry. "Did you know he's talking about running for city council next year? He says it's important to have the right connections and present the right image." Julian was silent for a moment. "And where do you fit in that image?" The question settled between them, heavy with implications. Before Rebecca could answer, the sound of the front door opening interrupted them. Dominic appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to calculated cordiality when he spotted Julian. "Julian, didn't expect to see you here," Dominic said, his tone pleasant but cool. "Just dropping off a housewarming gift," Julian replied, standing. "Congratulations on the new place. It's impressive." "Thank you. The dinner wrapped up early, so I thought I'd surprise Becca." Dominic moved to stand beside Rebecca, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. "We're hosting the Chambers next weekend. You should join us. Networking is everything these days." Julian smiled politely. "I appreciate the invitation, but I'll be out of town for a publishing conference." After Julian left, Dominic loosened his tie and poured himself a whiskey. "He still drives that same car from college?" "Not everyone measures success by material things," Rebecca replied, more sharply than intended. Dominic laughed. "Says the woman wearing the diamond earrings I bought last month." Rebecca touched one earring unconsciously, feeling its weight. The jewelry box upstairs held more gifts: necklaces, bracelets, watches, each one beautiful, each one feeling increasingly like compensation for something essential that was slipping away. That night, as Dominic slept beside her in their king-sized bed, Rebecca stared at the ceiling and thought about Julian's parting words at the door. Remember who you are, Becca, before the world tells you who you should be. The golden handcuffs of their new life gleamed in the darkness, beautiful and constraining all at once. The empty estate winter descended on Oak Ridge Heights, blanketing the immaculate lawns with snow and wrapping the neighborhood in a pristine silence. Rebecca stood at the bay window of her studio, watching fat flakes spiral down from a pewter sky. The canvas behind her remained blank just as it had for weeks. The house was quiet, emptier than usual with Dominic away on his third business trip that month. Something called the Archer Initiative had consumed him entirely over the past weeks. His explanations about investment opportunities and global markets had become increasingly vague. His late-night phone calls conducted behind closed doors. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, the community center director. Students asking when you'll be back, missing your energy in the art program. She sighed, remembering the reluctant email she'd sent withdrawing from teaching. Dominic had been insistent after his announcement about running for city council. It doesn't fit our new position, Becca, he'd explained, scrolling through emails at breakfast. Council members' spouses serve on charity boards and host fundraisers. They don't teach weekend art classes to retirees and troubled teens. Those troubled teens are creating beautiful work, she'd argued, and the program gives them somewhere to belong. He'd looked up then, his expression softening momentarily. I know you care about them. Maybe donate to the center instead? We could fund a scholarship in your name. The conversation had ended there, with Dominic rushing off to another meeting and Rebecca left wondering when charity had become a replacement for connection. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from her thoughts. Dominic wasn't due back for 3 more days. Dom, she called, descending the stairs. He stood in the foyer, snow melting from his expensive overcoat, his face uncharacteristically drawn. We need to talk. Something in his tone sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter air. They sat in the living room, the space between them on the sofa feeling vast. Dominic's usual confidence seemed diminished, replaced by a nervous energy. The Archer Initiative is moving forward, he began, his voice controlled. It's bigger than we anticipated. Game-changing. Rebecca nodded, waiting for him to continue. They've offered me a position as managing director. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Double my current salary. Stock options. Global influence. That's impressive, Rebecca said carefully. Where would we be relocating? Dominic's gaze faltered. That's what we need to discuss. I'd be based in Singapore. The initial contract is for 5 years. Singapore? Rebecca echoed, trying to process. What about your council run? Our life here? This is bigger than local politics, Becca. This is everything I've worked for. His eyes regained their familiar intensity. But there's a complication. She waited, a knot forming in her stomach. The position requires certain freedoms. The investors are traditional, image-conscious. He paused, selecting his words carefully. They expect a specific type of company representative, someone unencumbered by personal attachments that might complicate negotiations. Rebecca stared at him, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. Unencumbered, she repeated flatly. You mean divorced? Dominic winced at the word but didn't deny it. They need someone who can relocate without hesitation, work around the clock, entertain clients without constraints. And I'm the constraint, Rebecca said, her voice unnaturally calm despite the roaring in her ears. It's not personal. Becca, it's business. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I've made arrangements. The house will be yours. A very generous settlement. You'll never have to worry about money. How considerate of you to put a price tag on our marriage. The numbness was giving way to anger. How long have you been planning this? It's been evolving for months, he admitted. I wanted to tell you, but the timing never seemed right. Rebecca laughed bitterly. Is there a right time to tell your wife you're trading her for a promotion? That's not fair, Dominic protested. This opportunity will give you everything you've ever wanted, she finished for him. That's the problem, Dom. I stopped being what you wanted a long time ago. The truth hung between them, finally spoken. The lawyers have drawn up papers, he said after a long silence. Everything's outlined clearly. I'll be moved out by the end of the week. Rebecca stood abruptly. Don't bother waiting. I'm sure you have packing to do for Singapore. Later that night, after Dominic had left with a suitcase and promises to handle everything fairly, Rebecca wandered through the house that was now apparently hers. The expensive furnishings, the gleaming surfaces, the perfect decor, all of it felt hollow, props in a play that had suddenly ended. She found herself in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator where a save-the-date magnet held an invitation to the charity gala Dominic had insisted they attend next month. With a swift motion, she swept it to the floor along with all the other carefully curated reminders of their public life. 3 days later, when the initial shock had given way to a dull ache, Rebecca's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Julian standing there, concern etched on his face. "Vanessa called me," he said simply. "She was worried when you didn't respond to her messages." Rebecca hadn't told anyone about Dominic's departure, hadn't known where to begin. "He's gone," she said, the word still strange on her tongue. "He chose Singapore in success. I was excess baggage." Julian didn't offer platitudes or immediate solutions. Instead, he stepped forward and enfolded her in a gentle embrace that asked nothing of her. In that moment, as snow continued to fall outside, Rebecca allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. Her marriage had ended long before today. The house around them might be full of expensive things, but it had been an empty estate for months. Whispers of Worthspring arrived with determined optimism, coaxing reluctant blooms from soil that had been frozen for too long. Rebecca stood in the garden of what was now legally her home, pruning shears in hand, surveying the overgrown beds the landscapers had abandoned when their contract with Dominic ended. 3 months had passed since the divorce was finalized, a swift, clinical process thanks to Dominic's connections and generous settlement terms. He'd left for Singapore the day after signing the papers, his new life already waiting while Rebecca remained, surrounded by the shell of their old one. "I think this one's beyond saving," said a voice behind her. Rebecca turned to find Julian examining a withered hydrangea bush. He wore faded jeans and a simple t-shirt, gardening gloves sticking out of his back pocket. Since that snowy day when he'd appeared on her doorstep, he'd been a steady presence, never intrusive, but reliably there when the silence of the house became too oppressive. "You underestimate my stubborn streak," Rebecca replied, kneeling to inspect the plant's roots. "There's still life in there. It just needs the right care." Julian smiled, recognizing the metaphor. "Then it's in good hands." They worked side by side, clearing weeds and turning soil. Julian had appeared that morning with coffee and gardening supplies, responding to Rebecca's casual mention of wanting to reclaim the outdoor space. She'd been making small changes throughout the house, rearranging furniture, replacing Dominic's chosen artwork with her own paintings, dismantling the pristine studio in favor of a workable, lived-in creative space. Vanessa called again, Julian mentioned, placing a wheelbarrow load of mulch near a flower bed. "The spring session starts next week." Rebecca paused, wiping her brow. "I know I'm still not sure if I'm ready. For teaching? Or for people asking about Dominic?" "Both," she admitted. "The community center feels like part of my old life." Julian straightened, studying her thoughtfully. "Or maybe it's part of the real you that got set aside." His words struck a chord. Rebecca had been existing in a strange limbo, legally single but still wearing the identity of Dominic's wife, living in his chosen house, surrounded by the trappings of the life he'd designed. "I got a call from Elise Bennett yesterday," she said, returning to her pruning. "She wanted to remind me about the Oak Ridge Heights Ladies Auxiliary Spring Luncheon. Apparently my situation doesn't disqualify me from membership." Julian raised an eyebrow. Generous of her. She said, and I quote, "We understand your unfortunate circumstances, and while normally divorcees aren't included, your financial standing remains appropriate." Rebecca's imitation of Elise's refined tone made Julian laugh. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd consider it." She straightened, brushing dirt from her knees. "Then I hung up and applied for a vendor booth at the Riverside Arts Festival." Julian's eyes widened with genuine pleasure. "Becca, that's fantastic. Your work deserves to be seen." His enthusiasm was so different from Dominic's measured tolerance of her hobby. When she'd tentatively shown Julian some of her new paintings, raw, emotional pieces created during sleepless nights, he'd studied each one with respect, asking questions about her techniques and inspirations without a hint of condescension. It might come to nothing, she said, tempering expectations. Or it might be exactly where you need to begin, Julian countered. Either way, you're moving forward. They worked until afternoon shadows lengthened across the lawn, transforming the neglected garden into something that, while not yet beautiful, showed promise. Afterward, they sat on the patio with iced tea, pleasantly exhausted. I've been thinking about selling the house, Rebecca said, the idea taking shape as she spoke it. It's too big, too his. Julian nodded, unsurprised. Any thoughts on where you'd go? Somewhere smaller. Somewhere that could be mine. She hesitated. I looked at a little cottage near the Arts District yesterday. It has a sunroom that would make a perfect studio. It sounds like you. Rebecca smiled at his simple understanding. That's exactly what I thought when I saw it. As the conversation drifted to practical matters of real estate and moving logistics, Rebecca found herself studying Julian's profile. In the months since Dominic's departure, she'd learned more about Julian's life than she had in all their years of friendship. His publishing company had grown successful enough that he could choose projects based on merit rather than marketability. He lived in a modest but comfortable home just outside the city, filled with books and art collected from local creators. He volunteered teaching business skills to young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. His success had never been something he flaunted. In fact, she'd only discovered the extent of it when he'd mentioned offhandedly that he'd established a scholarship fund for aspiring writers. "Why did you never tell me about your foundation?" she asked suddenly. Julian looked surprised by the change in subject. It didn't seem relevant to our conversations. But it's important work. Something to be proud of, he shrugged. I am proud of it, but it doesn't define me. The contrast with Dominic's constant status-seeking couldn't have been clearer. Julian's accomplishments were substantial, yet he carried them lightly, never using them as currency in relationships. You know, Rebecca said carefully, in all these months, you've never once said I told you so about Dominic. Julian's expression grew serious. That's not how friendship works, Becca. Even when you were right, you saw who he was becoming before I could admit it. I saw someone I cared about with someone who didn't appreciate her value. He corrected gently, but your journey wasn't mine to direct. The simple honesty in his words made something shift inside. Rebecca, a recognition that genuine care came without conditions or expectations, thank you, she said softly, for seeing me. Not Dominic's wife or his ex-wife, just me. Julian's smile held a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. That's never been difficult, Becca. You've always been the easiest person in the world to see. As evening approached and Julian prepared to leave, Rebecca found herself reluctant to return to the empty house. For the first time, the reluctance wasn't born of loneliness, but of wanting to extend a moment that felt genuine and unforced. Would you like to have dinner next Friday? She asked impulsively. Not here. Somewhere new. Something flickered across Julian's face, surprise followed by a careful neutrality. I'd like that. As friends, of course. Rebecca considered his careful phrasing, appreciating the space he continued to give her. As two people sharing a meal, she clarified, and seeing where the conversation leads. His smile returned, tentative but hopeful. I'll look forward to it. After he left, Rebecca returned to the garden examining the transformed space. Like her life, it remained a work in progress, partly cleared, partly renewed, with much still to be decided. But for the first time in years, the possibilities felt like freedom rather than uncertainty. The whispers of worth that Julian had so consistently offered were finally finding resonance in her own voice. Fortune's rewritten autumn painted the Arts District in fiery hues, matching the vibrant canvas Rebecca was completing for the gallery's upcoming winter showcase. Sunlight streamed through the windows of her studio, the converted sunroom of the cottage she'd purchased 6 months earlier, illuminating the space where she now spent most of her days. The transition from Oak Ridge Heights to this modest neighborhood had raised eyebrows among Dominic's former social circle. Elise Bennett had been particularly vocal, lamenting Rebecca's downgrade with thinly veiled concern. All that settlement money and you choose to live like this? She'd asked during their final encounter at a charity function. Rebecca had simply smiled. I choose to live authentically. It's surprisingly affordable. Now, stepping back to assess her latest work, Rebecca felt the quiet satisfaction that had become familiar over the past year. The painting, an abstract exploration of metamorphosis, would join 5 others in her first featured collection. Helena Thornwood, the gallery owner, had approached her after seeing Rebecca's booth at the Riverside Arts Festival, offering representation that had quickly evolved into friendship and mentorship. The cottage doorbell chimed, pulling Rebecca from her artistic focus. She wiped her hands on a cloth and made her way through the living room, its walls adorned with a mixture of her own work and pieces from her students at the community center. Julian stood on her porch, a manila envelope in one hand and a small bouquet of autumn wildflowers in the other. His sandy hair was slightly tousled by the October breeze, his smile as warm as ever. Perfect timing, Rebecca greeted him, accepting both offerings with a kiss. I've just reached a good stopping point. The mysterious showcase piece? Julian asked, following her inside. Still maintaining your artistic secrecy, I see, Rebecca laughed. Helena insists the reveal should be part of the experience, even for boyfriends who happen to own publishing companies. The term boyfriend still felt charmingly inadequate for what Julian had become in her life. Their careful first dinner had led to weekly outings, which gradually evolved into something deeper. Julian had approached their relationship with the same patient thoughtfulness he brought to everything, never rushing, always attentive, his feelings clear but never pressuring. Fair enough, he conceded, settling onto the comfortable sofa she'd chosen to replace the formal furniture from her previous life. I bring news that might distract you from your creative mysteries anyway. Rebecca arranged the wildflowers in a hand-thrown vase, a gift from one of her teenage students, and joined him. Good news, judging by those flowers. Julian handed her the envelope. Open it. Inside, she found a formal letter on Porter Publishing letterhead, addressed to the Riverside Community Center Arts Program. As she read, her eyes widened. Julian, this is a grant for $50,000 for the arts program. For materials, scholarships, instructor stipends. She looked up, momentarily speechless. This will transform what we can offer. He nodded, clearly pleased by her reaction. The Foundation's board approved it unanimously. Vanessa's proposal was compelling, and your students' portfolio submissions were extraordinary. This isn't charity, Becca. It's investment in genuine talent. Rebecca set the letter aside carefully. You never mentioned the center had applied. Confidentiality during the review process, Julian explained. Even for the publisher's girlfriend. The integrity behind that simple statement exemplified everything that had drawn her to him. His principles were never performative, never wielded for advantage or recognition. There's something else I wanted to discuss, Julian continued, his tone shifting slightly. I've been offered a position on the National Literary Foundation Board. Julian, that's incredible, Rebecca exclaimed, knowing how prestigious the appointment was. It would mean quarterly meetings in New York, he explained. Possibly some international travel for their global literacy initiatives. Rebecca felt a momentary tightness in her chest, an echo of old anxieties about ambition and absence. Julian must have noticed because he reached for her hand. Before I accepted, I wanted to talk about what it might mean for us, he said, for our time together. The contrast with Dominic's unilateral decision-making wasn't lost on her. You'd be wonderful in that role, she said honestly. Your perspective on accessible publishing is exactly what they need. But? Rebecca sighed. No but. Just memories of a different conversation with a different man. Julian's expression grew thoughtful. We're writing our own story, Becca. Different characters, different choices. I know. She squeezed his hand. And in our story, I fully support your taking this position. Just promise me one thing? Anything. When you're in New York surrounded by literary elites, remember there's a slightly paint-smudged woman in a small cottage who's extraordinarily proud of you. Julian's smile deepened. How could I forget when she's the most remarkable person I've ever known? The simple sincerity in his voice made Rebecca's heart swell. This was the fundamental difference she'd come to recognize. Julian's ambitions existed alongside his relationships, not in place of them. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner together in her compact kitchen, Rebecca contemplated how thoroughly her definition of wealth had transformed. The spacious emptiness of her former home had been replaced by this cottage brimming with creativity and purpose. The social connections that Dominic had cultivated so carefully had given way to genuine friendships with fellow artists, students, and community members who valued her contributions rather than her address. Oh, Julian said, pausing in his vegetable chopping. I almost forgot. This came for you at my office. He retrieved an envelope from his jacket pocket. Rebecca recognized the Singapore postmark immediately. Communications from Dominic had become increasingly rare, limited to occasional financial matters handled primarily through lawyers. The note inside was brief, typed rather than handwritten. Rebecca. Business brings me to the States next month. The Archer initiative has exceeded projections, resulting in the enclosed dividend payment from your settlement stock options. While in town, I'd appreciate meeting briefly to discuss transferring the remaining Oak Ridge property interests entirely to your name. My assistant will contact you with potential dates. Regards. Dominic. Rebecca passed the note to Julian without comment, then examined the check, a substantial sum that represented more money than her paintings had earned all year. Will you see him? Julian asked, his tone carefully neutral. Rebecca considered the question. Yes, there's no reason not to finalize the property matters. She placed the check on the counter, and I should thank him for this. It will cover the renovation costs for the center's new darkroom. Julian studied her thoughtfully. You seem at peace with it all. I am, she realized, somewhat surprised by the truth of it. Dominic chose a path that made sense to him. I can't fault him for wanting something different than what we had. That's generous, Rebecca shook her head. It's realistic. We were heading in different directions long before he left. His departure just forced me to find my own way sooner. Julian resumed his chopping, a small smile playing at his lips. And how do you feel about the way that's turned out? Rebecca moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her cheek against his shoulder. Like I found something authentic when I stopped chasing the life I thought I was supposed to want. 2 weeks later, Rebecca stood in the gallery surrounded by friends, students, and art enthusiasts attending the opening of her showcase. Helena had positioned her metamorphosis piece as the centerpiece, a swirling composition that began in structured, rigid lines of muted grays and gradually transformed into vibrant, organic forms filled with color and movement. It's extraordinary, said a familiar voice behind her. Rebecca turned to find Dominic standing there, immaculately dressed in what she recognized as bespoke Singapore tailoring. He looked successful, polished, and somehow smaller than she remembered. Dominic, I didn't expect to see you here. Their scheduled meeting wasn't until the following day. My flight arrived early. He gestured toward her painting. When my assistant researched your current information, this event appeared. I was curious. Rebecca nodded, unsure what to say to this man who had once been the center of her world. You're doing well, he observed, his tone suggesting mild surprise. Teaching, painting, living in the arts district. I am, she confirmed simply. Dominic's gaze drifted around the gallery, taking in the diverse crowd, the unconventional space, the evident success of the event. It suits you, he finally said, an unexpected note of sincerity in his voice. This life. It suits you in a way ours never did. Before Rebecca could respond, Julian appeared with 2 glasses of champagne. He hesitated briefly upon seeing Dominic, then stepped forward with composed grace. Dominic, welcome back. He handed 1 glass to Rebecca, his presence beside her steady but unassuming. Recognition flickered across Dominic's features as he observed the subtle intimacy between them. Julian, I see some things have changed significantly. Some things were always there, Rebecca said quietly. Just waiting for the right time. An awkward silence followed, broken when Helena called for attention to make a toast to the featured artists. As the crowd shifted, Dominic took a step back. I should go. Jet lag, he explained. We can still meet tomorrow about the property matters? Rebecca nodded. Of course. The lawyer has the paperwork ready. Dominic hesitated, then added, Singapore has been everything I hoped professionally. The Archer initiative is expanding to Dubai next quarter. The statement hung between them, part justification, part confession. I'm glad, Rebecca said sincerely. I hope it brings you what you're looking for. As Dominic departed, Julian slipped his arm around Rebecca's waist. Okay? He asked softly. Rebecca leaned into his embrace, watching her former husband disappear through the gallery doors, a man rushing toward his next achievement. More than okay, she answered truthfully. She turned back to her painting, to the transformation it depicted, from constraint to freedom, from monochrome to vivid color. Like the canvas, her own metamorphosis hadn't happened in a single dramatic moment, but through a gradual, sometimes painful process of rediscovery. Julian followed her gaze. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca smiled, taking in the room filled with people who knew her as an artist, a teacher, a friend, not as an accessory to someone else's ambitions. "I'm thinking about different kinds of wealth," she said, "and how fortunate I am to have found the kind that matters." Later that night, walking hand in hand back to her cottage under a canopy of stars, Rebecca felt the full measure of that fortune, not in the check from Singapore or the paintings sold at the gallery, but in the authentic life she'd reclaimed and the patient love that had given her the space to find her way back to herself. Some fortunes, she had learned, couldn't be calculated in dividends or measured in square footage. The most valuable ones were written in moments of truth, in creative courage, and in the quiet certainty of being truly seen by someone who had always recognized her worth.